SpaceX, the Orbital Brain Plan. Musk applied to the FCC to deploy 1 million satellites. On February 1, 2026, Musk and SpaceX dropped a bombshell on the global tech community. An 8-page application document submitted to the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, FCC, officially announced the birth of the Orbital Brain Plan. SpaceX plans to deploy up to 1 million satellites in Earth's orbit. But this is not just an upgraded version of Starlink, it is a complete revolution of the human computing paradigm. What Musk wants to do is simple and crazy: move the original AI data centers that run on the ground all to the sky. Why go through all this trouble? The answer is not that Musk has a fixation on space, but that the road on the ground is almost paved. If you pay attention to the AI industry in the past 2 years, you will find an embarrassing reality. The growth rate of generative AI models is astonishing, doubling every 10 months. But the infrastructure on the ground can't keep up. Industry data from 2025 shows that there is a widespread shortage of computing power globally. And this barrenness is not only due to the lack of chips, but also because there is no electricity. Traditional super-large data centers are truly power-consuming monsters. AIGIGAWATT scale data center consumes enough electricity to support the daily operation of a medium-sized city. On the ground, tech giants are facing unprecedented triple red lines, energy sovereignty conflicts. As electricity prices rise, local communities begin to protest that data centers are occupying residents' electricity. What resource crisis? The high heat generated by AI operation requires a vast amount of fresh water for cooling, which becomes extremely sensitive in the context of climate change. Land approval, quagmire. To build a compliant large data center, the process from land acquisition to environmental impact assessment often takes several years. By early 2026, these contradictions had reached the brink of explosion. The evolution of AI requires more computing power, and computing power requires more electricity and water. While the resource allocation logic on the ERTH surface is already at an overloaded state, the operational costs of traditional ground data centers account for 40% to 60% of their operations, which essentially means fighting against nature head-on. Musk saw this, rather than struggling on the ground for a few degrees of electricity, a few tons of water, and the bureaucratic limits. It's better to directly break out of this closed system and search for a new physical field. Since the ERT can accommodate it, let AI cool off in low ERT orbit. MOV data centers to space sounds like science fiction, but from the first principles, this has natural advantages in thermodynamics and energy acquisition. In low Earth orbit, satellites can receive solar radiation that has not been weakened by the atmosphere, with a light intensity of approximately 1366 Wm2. If you place satellite in a specific sun-synchronous orbit, you can even achieve nearly 100% year-round sunlight coverage. This means that orbital data centers can achieve an energy acquisition efficiency 5 times higher than on the ground. More importantly, space is an almost unlimited heat sink. On the ground, we need expensive cooling towers and fans. In space, the background temperature in deep space is close to absolute zero, and we can directly throw heat into the universe through thermal radiation. In terms of infrastructure indicators, the orbital center is completely overwhelming the traditional ground model. The ground center is like a tenant dependent on the weather, relying on the power grid and limited by day and night solar energy, while the orbital center is a lord with its own power plant, capturing nearly constant and unaltered solar energy in low Earth orbit. This directly led to a cliff, like drop in energy costs after scaling up. The cost per kilowatt hour will plummet from the ground as 5 cents to 15 cents to $0.005 to 1 cent. The ground center is a true pump, highly dependent on the circulation of fresh water and air. The orbital center completely abandons the medium and uses the passive radiation in deep space to disperse waste heat into the universe, achieving true zero environmental load. While the ground center is still struggling with the approval process for thousands of acres of land, the orbital center has achieved zero land occupation and flexible deployment through modular rapid launch. The technical motivation of the orbital brain is very pure. Energy is free, space is free, and the heat dissipation path is clear. In SpaceX's application, it describes an extremely complex constellation system. THI's network is designed with multiple narrow orbital shells, each with a thickness controlled within 50 kilometers. This high-precision orbital division is to fit millions of satellites into a limited space while ensuring they do not collide through orbital mechanics. Algorithms. The satellites will be divided into two categories. The high-latitude training clusters operate on the Sun's synchronous orbit, responsible for the pre-training of large-scale models as there is a never-setting sun there providing continuous power. The low-inclination reasoning clusters operate above densely populated areas, using the laser links of STA-RLINK with ground stations to collaborate and provide millisecond-level AI responses to billions of users worldwide. THI's no longer a simple communication network, but a constantly beating silicon-based neocortex floating above humanity. Many people have a misconception about space, thinking that it is close to absolute zero. Surely a natural big refrigerator and chips can just run freely there. But the reality is very harsh. Space is not an air-conditioned room, but a huge vacuum-insulated cup. On Earth, we can use fans to move air or water flow to remove heat. But in a vacuum, since there is no medium, these two methods are all useless. If you place a pile of high-performance GPUs running at full speed in space, they will quickly burn themselves out due to the inability to dissipate heat. THIS is the first physical limit faced by the orbital brain, the thermodynamic deadlock. SpaceX's engineers must rely entirely on one of the most primitive and extreme physical phenomena, thermal radiation. ACC to Stefan Boll TZMN's law. The power of an object to emit heat is proportional to the fourth power of its temperature. THIS tells us two harsh engineering facts. First state, if you want satellites to emit more waste heat, you either have to make the heat dissipation plates extremely large or have the chips operate at a higher temperature. Second, because it is a fourth power relationship, every slight increase in temperature will result in a geometrically exponential increase in heat dissipation efficiency. To solve this problem, SpaceX describes an extremely complex thermal management architecture. In the application document, EACH computing satellite is like a metal flower blooming in space. The huge, deployable radiation panels are its petals. To dissipate 1000 W of heat at around 77 C, you need at least 3 square meters of double-sided heat dissipation panels. When the planned scale reaches megawatt level, the size of these heat dissipation panels will reach kilometer level. But this is not enough. SpaceX is also experimenting with more hardcore solutions. They plan to lay closed liquid cooling systems inside the satellites using pumps to transport the heat from the GPU cores to the outer radiation panels. Even, they are also trying to use wideband DGIP semiconductors like silicon carbide and gallium nitride, as these materials can operate stably at higher temperatures. This is Musk's cunning plan since the laws of physics cannot be violated. Let's push the heat dissipation to the physical limit. While other companies are still struggling with water resources and environmental impact assessments on the ground, SpaceX has already been calculating how to use several kilometers of aluminum foil to release the rage of AI into deep space. Since cosmic rays are inevitable, let's turn the data center into a distributed swarm of sick bees, sending expensive GPUs into orbit, with heat being the only threat. But there is also a fatal one: high-energy particle streams. On Earth, the thick atmosphere and magnetic field are our bulletproof vests, but in orbit, cosmic rays and solar flares are like countless tiny subatomic bullets, ready to penetrate the logic gates of the chips at any time. This can lead to two consequences. One is bit flipping, causing the AI model to suddenly calculate a number incorrectly. The other is permanent hardware damage, turning the entire graphics card into scrap metal. The traditional solution is to use aerospace grade chips. EUT's chips for stability, processes. This computing power SpaceX, however, has taken a completely different violent aesthetic route. The Y collaborated with XAI to develop a kind of nano-composite shielding material. This material is no longer a heavy and dense lead plate, but instead, it MBEDS special. Microscopic particles in the polymer, effectively blocking charged particles, while weighing only a fraction of that of aluminum. But the real trick is not in the hardware, but in the robustness of the software and algorithms. Since individual satellites may make mistakes, introduce an extremely powerful verification mechanism at the model level. TROC-H, the laser link of STRRINK, the thousands of satellites are interconnected in real time. When a task is issued, multiple nodes perform parallel calculations and cross-check each other. If a node is interfered with by cosmic rays, the system will automatically identify it and make it recalculate. Net Array AliZ cost management is what makes Musk chaos opponents most desperate. Leveraging the extremely low launch costs of Starship, SpaceX has no intention of keeping these satellites operational for decades. The IR strategy is broken, then broken. Each computing satellite is expected to have an operational lifespan of only 35 years, and when IT expires, it will be re-entered into the atmosphere. Ecological completely overturns the traditional aerospace industry. In the past, we regarded satellites as real support, each one needing extreme care. Now, Musk treats computing satellites as server nodes on the moon. IFA groups. The next batch of stereo SHIPs will see as a bypass distributed supercomputation characteristics is the IT does not pursue absolute perfection at a single point, but seeks infinite survival at the system level. THIS using algorithms to counter entropy increase and using low-cost transportation capacity. To counter, hardware aging logic is the truly terrifying core of the orbital brain. If we view the orbital brain as a software, then StarShip is the only underlying operating system that carries it. With StarShip, all these 100,000 satellite concepts are just expensive fantasies on paper. In traditional aerospace logic, the cost of sending 1 kilogram of payload into orbit is approximately several thousand or even tens of thousands of dollars. If calculated at this price, building a data center in space would be financial suicide. StarShip is completely shattering this number, with StarShip entering the high-frequency launch stage in 2026. The launch capacity has stabilized at 100 to 150 tons, while the cost has been reduced to under $10 million through the entire process of reuse. This means that the cost of sending computing equipment into orbit has dropped to $10 to $20 per kilogram. This price is even lower than the urgent air freight rates of some multinational logistics companies. Musk once made an extremely crazy calculation during an interview. The StarShip has the potential to transport a satellite cluster capable of generating 300 gig megaATTs to 500 gig megaATTs of electricity into orbit every year if you don't have DDS. We can refer to this. It is almost equivalent to the total electricity consumption of all economic activities in the entire United States. All this electricity is converted into just 2 or 3 years. The computing power resources controlled by SpaceX will directly surpass the combined total of all the major tech companies on the ground. From the perspective of cost indicators, this seems like a risky bet, but in fact, IT is a precise form of dimensional reduction attack. The initial investment in the orbital computing power network is indeed astonishing. ECH gig AWT costs approximately 50 billion to 100 billion US dollars, which is several times that of the ground centers. As towering moat will keep most players out. Only SpaceX, which has its own self-developed rocket Starship, can play this game. Once the satellites are in orbit, the nature of the game changes. The operating costs of the ground centers are high due to labor, electricity, water, and equipment maintenance, while the orbital centers enter an extremely low operating cost mode, fully automated operation with free energy. Gauge the hardware upgrade cycles of both are essential years. The logic is completely different. The ground centers require cumbersome on-site designs and assembly, while the orbital centers follow the brutal logic of replacing broken parts, completing the replacement by relaunching through the scale SHIP, where importantly, it bypasses the increasingly heavy compliance and environmental taxes of efficiently the fringes of the out-gauge the initial investment in orbital computing power is still very high. Its operating costs have dropped sharply. On the ground, every time you move you have to pay more to power costs. As long as the satellite is free, the signal is free. This one-time investment consumption business logic completely reshape the supply structure of the global computing power market. What SpaceX is doing is using the extreme computing power benefits to offset the technical difficulty of spaceflight. The cost of transporting computing power is lower than the cost of building a complex cooling system on the ground. The migration of the computing power focus becomes an inevitable historical trend. Any grand plan had IT's dark side. With a scale of 1 million satellites, the entire human civilization has stood at a crossroads. The first issue is the physical congestion. The orbit is filled with millions of satellites. Any minor collision could trigger a chain reaction, also known as the Kessler phenomenon. To prevent this from happening, SpaceX launched the Stargate Space Situational Awareness Platform in 2026. The Y utilized the 30,000 star sensors on the Stada INK satellites to turn each satellite into a mobile sensor monitoring the trajectories of all surrounding objects in real time. The power to formulate these transportation rules currently lies firmly in the hands of space elites. In a real avoidance case at the end of 2025, they resolved the potential collision with only milliseconds of autonomous decision-making. This capability makes traditional ground radar monitoring somewhat manageable under storage tools. But the deeper concern lies in the atmosphere. A satellite reaches the end of its lifespan and will enter the atmosphere permanently, generating approximately 30 kilograms of carbon dioxide particles. At a scale of 1 million, the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere each year may exceed 3,000 tons. Scientists extensive monitoring these particles will changing the area of the atmosphere and this is not just a technological competition. It has escalated to an ecological security game. Despite the condemnation from environmental organizations and legal obstacles from competitors, like Amazon, Musk has not slowed down. For him, the orbital brain is never an endpoint. It is the first stepping stone to a tip E2 civilization, according to the Karadas half-scale. By establishing this vast computing and energy network in the low Earth orbit, SpaceX is actually building a super brain for future Mars settlers and lunar base construction. Musk's long-term goal is to establish an automated factory on the moon, directly using lunar resources to manufacture satellites, thus pushing the computing power scale to 100 terawatts 10 to the power of 14 watts. We are witnessing a paradigm shift. Human civilization is accelerating from the ERTH center model Systems model. Computing power is no longer buried deep underground in a data center. Instead, it has become a luminous halo orbiting the Earth. UEVR controls the lowest cost energy and the largest heat. Dissipation area will hold the ultimate hegemony in the air. At this ordinary node, the orbital brain is not just a satellite constellation. It is the second brain pulsating in space for humanity, indicating that we are advancing towards an interstellar civilization form at almost crazy speed. The launch of those 1 billion satellites has just begun. In the torrent of this era, we either aim to coexist with this orbital air, or we can all stand on the ground and watch as the night skies, redefined by silicon-based sparks.
What you just saw is merely a fragment of the truth. Welcome to the Da Vinci Matrix, the ultimate operating system for the Super in the EVI Dual L. We are decoding the world, one algorithm at a time. Click left to rewire your brain. Click right to witness the future. Don't be a spectator. Join the fleet. Subscribe now before the AI takes over.